What if no one was truly your friend? What if behind every smile, every kind word, every gesture of closeness, there was a hidden calculation? It's an uncomfortable question, almost offensive. We prefer to believe that the affection we feel for others and the affection they show us is genuine, that our bonds are built on the solid rock of sincerity, not on the shifting sands of convenience. But some perspectives strip away the illusions of humanity without mercy, filters, or comfort. Niccolò Machiavelli's is one of them. The Florentine doesn't write to comfort you. He writes to wake you up, to pull you out of sweet fairy tales about human nature and hold up a raw mirror to your motivations and everyone else's. Among the illusions he tears down with the most intensity is one of our most beloved, the belief in friendship as a sacred refuge. He doesn't completely deny it, but he warns that it is almost always a mask, a strategy, a fragile bond that snaps at the slightest gust of self-interest. Machiavelli doesn't speak out of bitterness. He speaks from observation. And what he sees is this: people are fickle, ungrateful, treacherous. Not because they are evil by nature, but because they are driven by fear, ambition, the instinct to survive. They are moldable like water, able to pledge loyalty in the morning and betray you by evening if the wind changes. In this human landscape, friendship does not grow like a strong and noble tree, but like a vine that stretches toward the sun. Power, influence, personal gain. Still, we cling to it, because we need to believe that someone is on our side no matter what. That even in the darkest moments, someone will light a candle for us. But Machiavelli whispers something in your ear that you don't want to hear. That candle, in many cases, will only stay lit as long as you also light the path of the one holding it. When your light dims, when you stumble, when you fall into disgrace, don't expect that flame to keep burning. The friend then becomes a bystander, or worse, someone who turns their back on you out of caution, convenience, or simple self-preservation. Cruel? Maybe. True? More than once. Think about the moments in your life when you truly needed someone. Not the good days, the celebrations, the applause. Think about the crises, the losses, the defeats. How many of your friends were there? How many disappeared without explanation, without a decent excuse? Machiavelli wouldn't be surprised. He would say they simply stopped needing you. That the bond, not built on virtue or strength of character, couldn't stand once the usefulness was gone. This doesn't mean true friendships don't exist. But in Machiavelli's view, they're as rare as diamonds in the mud. They exist, yes, but they should never be assumed. They should never be taken for granted. The mistake isn't in wanting authentic bonds, but in believing that all bonds are authentic. The real danger lies in blind trust, in putting your entire soul in another's hands without measuring the risk, in forgetting that, in the end, people respond more to their own interests than to their affections, and that friendship, in many cases, is merely a temporary alliance between two lonely souls who need each other not to drown. Machiavelli also warns of another danger. Power turns friends into obstacles. For those who rule, who lead, who strive to move forward, sincere friendships can become chains. How can you make a tough, necessary, but unpopular decision if the friend looking at you expects an exception? How can you eliminate a threat if the person behind it has shared your confidences for years? Emotional ties can become shackles, and a leader who doesn't break them in time puts their position, their mission, even their survival, at risk. This doesn't just apply to politics. Even in everyday life, friendships can become burdens. A friend may manipulate you, emotionally blackmail you, demand irrational loyalty, or remind you of old favors as a form of control. Often, they don't even do it out of malice. They do it because they too are trapped in the logic of need. Because they too are afraid of being alone. Because, like you, they can't stand the uncertainty of not knowing who will be there when the storm hits. So they squeeze. They demand. They turn into something other than what you thought they were. And this is where Machiavelli's thinking becomes an invitation, not to bitter distrust, but to clarity. To see relationships with open eyes, not eyes fogged by childish illusions. To understand that true friendship, when it comes, should be treated like a rare treasure, but never used as an unconditional crutch. Because unconditional love doesn't exist among humans who live under the law of necessity. Machiavelli isn't telling you not to love, not to trust, not to share. He's telling you to do it wisely. Not to mistake company for loyalty. not to place your fate in the hands of someone just because you shared a few afternoons of laughter. The Machiavellian view is uncomfortable because it removes the blindfold. It forces you to recognize that often you're alone, even when surrounded by people. That not everyone who hugs you is willing to hold you up. That friendship, as you imagine it, is more hope than frequent reality. But it also offers a kind of strength, the strength of someone who no longer deceives themselves, who no longer idealizes, who knows that true bonds must be tested, not assumed, earned, not expected. Perhaps the greatest lesson is not that friendship doesn't exist, but that it's not as common as we think, and that the only way not to be devoured by disappointment is to see others for what they are: fragile, contradictory beings, pulled by 1,000 forces, self-interest among them. It's not about living in paranoia, but about staying awake. Not about closing your heart, but about opening your eyes. Because in the end, maybe the true friend isn't the one who's always there, but the one who, when absent, doesn't lie, doesn't fake, doesn't promise what they can't deliver. Maybe, in a world where most only offer affection while you're useful, the one who tells you the truth, even if it hurts, is the only one who deserves your trust. And Machiavelli, though he doesn't embrace you, has been telling you that for centuries. We like to think that affection is enough. That if we're good friends, we'll be rewarded with solid friendship in return. That if we give with our heart, the other will respond with the same devotion. But this idea, noble as it may seem, is one of the most dangerous, because it confuses the world we wish for with the world we actually live in. And in the real world, Machiavelli reminds us, affection bows to convenience, sincerity dissolves in the face of fear, and loyalty breaks under the pressure of self-interest. There's a kind of painful innocence in expecting others to always act out of love or virtue, as if the highest emotions were immune to life's tensions, to the passage of time, to the wear and tear of the ego. But sooner or later, experience hits us with evidence to the contrary. That friend who swore they'd always be there, but vanished when you faced a tough decision. The person who claimed to admire you, but avoided you once you were no longer useful. Or the one you yourself let down when you felt threatened, when fear outweighed your loyalty. All of us, at some point, are both witnesses to and participants in these betrayals. The most disturbing part isn't that it happens, it's that it happens with brutal ease. No one wakes up thinking, today I'm going to betray my friend. But they do if the pressure is strong enough, if the reward is too tempting, if the cost of staying loyal is too high. And in that moment, the bond reveals itself for what it really was. Not a sacred union, but an implicit pact, only as strong, or as weak, as the circumstances that support it. Machiavelli doesn't blame anyone for this. He simply exposes it as an inevitable part of human nature. The mistake, he says, is ignoring it. And yet, we keep believing. We keep giving ourselves. We keep saying, count on me, without knowing how much we can endure if put to the test. Perhaps because, deep down, we need to. Because living without trust is like living exposed in the cold. But trust doesn't mean closing your eyes. One can trust with clarity, with caution, with a sharp awareness of the other's limits. One can offer friendship without demanding eternity, without assuming it will always be mutual, without building castles in the air that will collapse in the first storm. One of the greatest lessons to be drawn from Machiavelli's view is the importance of seeing beyond words. We're all skilled at saying what others want to hear. We all know how to dress our intentions in pretty phrases. But time, and only time, reveals the true substance of relationships. Not on sunny days, but when it rains. Not in laughter, but in silence. Not in abundance, but in scarcity. There, where masks are no longer possible, where decisions cost and hurt, the truth emerges. And that truth is often bitter. There's no gentle way to discover that someone you considered a brother was only by your side while you were shining. That affection evaporated when you were no longer useful. That supposed closeness was actually a transaction. But even that bitterness has immense value, the value of clarity. Because only those who have lost a false friendship can begin to recognize the real ones. That said, not everything is cold calculation. The human soul is complex, holding both selfishness and tenderness, convenience and genuine affection. But even the purest feelings need more than promises to survive. They need tests and they need space. Sometimes, demanding absolute loyalty from another human being is a failure to understand their fragility. Expecting someone to always be there, to support you in everything, to never doubt, to never have their own boundaries, is asking more than they can give. And when that happens, the frustration doesn't just come from betrayal, but from unrealistic expectations. Machiavelli, in his pragmatism, doesn't tell you to give up on relationships. He tells you not to idolize them. Know who you're talking to. Observe carefully. Don't place your fate in the hands of someone who hasn't shown firmness when you needed it most. Don't build your most important decisions on affections that haven't yet been tested. Because the risk isn't just being disappointed, it's losing everything by blindly trusting someone who never deserved it. And here lies another uncomfortable truth. Many times we don't want to see. We cling to certain people because they represent something to us: security, companionship, identity. We resist accepting that they are not who we thought they were, because it would mean redrawing our map of relationships, and maybe being more alone. But Machiavelli insists, clarity hurts, yes, but it's better than self-deception. Because the price of deception is not only emotional, it's existential. It's paid in time, in missed opportunities, in poor decisions that could have been avoided if we had looked with more reason and less desire. Friendship, when it's real, doesn't fear being looked at with these eyes. It survives even suspicion because it's built on something deeper than convenience or fleeting affection. It's made of respect, of shared truth, of mutual acceptance of our limitations. But that kind of friendship is rare. You won't find it on every corner or in every toast. And recognizing its rarity shouldn't make us cynical, but careful, respectful of those who have proven themselves, not with words, but with actions. Maybe that's why, when we do find true friendship, it changes us forever. Not because it comforts us, but because it teaches us. It shows us that, amid the noise, there are still bonds that ask for nothing, that don't negotiate, that simply exist. But we can only appreciate them once we've understood how much illusion exists in most of our relationships. Only after losing the false ones can we recognize how extraordinary the real ones are. Machiavelli doesn't write to rob you of hope. He writes to give it back with roots, so it doesn't melt at the first touch of reality. So that your way of trusting isn't childish but conscious. So that you don't walk blindly, expecting everyone to be loyal, but with your eyes open, knowing that many will only be loyal as long as it benefits them. And even so, you'll still find a few who, against all odds, will stand by you even when they gain nothing from it. Those, and only those, deserve your soul. Because in the end, even if most are only your friend while you shine, there's always the possibility of finding someone who stays when your light goes out. It's rare. It's hard. But it exists. And maybe, thanks to Machiavelli, you'll be better prepared to recognize it. Perhaps the most painful part of all this isn't realizing that most friendships are fragile, or that, deep down, many people are with you out of need, habit, or convenience. The truly heartbreaking part is accepting that you, too, have been that someone. That you haven't always been where you promised, that you pulled away when you got scared, that you shut the door when your world was falling apart. And understanding this, with raw honesty, without excuses, is one of the hardest, yet most liberating acts you can perform. Because it strips you of the right to play the victim and forces you to see your humanity with open eyes. We're not as loyal as we think we are. We're not as consistent, not as brave, not as pure as we like to believe. And yet, we keep loving, keep seeking connection, keep hoping someone will choose us, that someone will understand us. In that contradiction lives the complexity of the human soul. We need others, but we fear being abandoned. We want to be loved, but sometimes we don't know how to love well. We demand loyalty, but aren't always capable of giving it. Accepting Machiavelli's view doesn't mean becoming insensitive, cynical, or cruel. It means waking up, no longer moving through life based on illusions, but learning to live with awareness. Understanding that human bonds, like everything in life, are subject to time, to wear, to the tension between who we are and who we wish to be. No one is perfect. No one is constant. No one is absolutely faithful. And this shouldn't lead us to contempt, but rather to a more mature form of affection, one that understands, that doesn't demand miracles, that knows even the most genuine love can falter when strong winds blow. That's why it's so important to learn to choose with open eyes. To not call friend just anyone who smiles at us. To not share our intimacy with someone who hasn't shown they can hold it. To not build life plans on shaky ground. This doesn't mean living in paranoia, but with discernment. Watch how someone behaves when there's no applause. What they say about you when you're not around. How they react when you succeed or when you fall. Because it's there, in those shadowy places, that the true substance of a bond is revealed. But it also means looking at yourself with the same level of scrutiny. Asking yourself if you are worthy of the friendship you seek. If you only show up when things are easy. If your affections are selective, self-serving, dependent on what the other gives you. Because you can't expect to receive what you don't know how to offer. And if you can't offer it, at least be honest. Don't promise eternal presence if you can't sustain it. Don't offer understanding if you're going to judge. Don't say, count on me, if you'll run at the first sign of a storm. Better the truth than disappointment disguised as tenderness. Perhaps that is one of Machiavelli's most radical lessons. Learning to see without filters. Not because the world is a miserable place, but because only from clarity can we build real connections. Loving without illusions is not loving less. It's loving better. It's stopping the idealization and beginning to respect. It's understanding that the other is free, limited, fragile, just like you. And that despite all that, they may choose to stay. May choose to be by your side. May even risk something for you. But that choice cannot be demanded. It can only be offered. And it can only be sustained if there is truth. This doesn't mean resigning yourself to coldness, but rather practicing a deeper form of tenderness. A tenderness that doesn't collapse under disillusionment, that doesn't break with absence, that doesn't demand perfection. There's something deeply human and beautiful in continuing to choose someone even after you've seen them fail. In continuing to trust, even if not blindly. In continuing to offer love, even knowing it may not be returned. Not because you're naive, but because you've understood that the beauty of a bond lies not in its guarantee, but in its daily choice. From this perspective, true friendship is not a sacred pact, but a constant practice. A daily act of presence. A silence that accompanies. A gesture that asks for nothing. And above all, a renunciation of control over the other. Mature friendship doesn't demand absolute loyalty, but mutual respect for freedom. It doesn't ask for eternity, but for honesty. It doesn't promise salvation, but companionship for the journey. That's why, when you find someone who stays, not because it benefits them, not because they need you, but because they value you, you realize you've found something rare. Something that defies the laws of self-interest, that survives beyond usefulness, that can even grow in adversity. That kind of friendship doesn't need to be declared. Doesn't need selfies or soul brother quotes. It only needs space. Truth. And sometimes, silence. And when you lose that friendship, because sometimes life tears it from your hands through mistakes, distance, or death, the pain doesn't destroy you. Because you know it was real. Because you didn't live in delusion. Because you appreciated it with open eyes. Because you didn't take it for granted. Because you cared for it and you also let it be. So, understanding Machiavelli isn't about assuming no one is your friend. It's accepting that many won't be. That few will truly be. That it's not wise to call someone brother without having seen how they act in a storm. That trust shouldn't be shouted out, but earned through actions. And that you, too, must strive to deserve the trust of others. Because in a world where most are driven by self-interest, someone who acts from the heart, with firmness, clarity, and lucid compassion, becomes exceptional. And that exception is not a weakness. It is a strength. A rarity that transforms. An example that inspires. A gesture that is remembered even when life separates the paths. That's why you shouldn't be ashamed of still believing in friendship, even if you now believe from a different place. Believe in it with your feet on the ground. With your eyes wide open. With a heart trained by loss and disappointment. Believe in it not as an ideal refuge, but as a free choice. As a rare gift. As a conscious act. And if you ever feel like you have no true friends, maybe it's not a tragedy. Maybe it's a moment of clarity. Of cleansing. Of seeing things anew. Of letting go of those who were only there for what you offered. Of making space for those who want to be there for who you are. Because those, even if few, are worth more than 100 acquaintances who only shined with you but fled when it got dark. Machiavelli doesn't leave us hopeless. He takes off the blindfolds. He gives us tools. He says, look closely, act wisely, choose carefully. And then, when you find the one who stays, without asking, without demanding, without fear, you'll know you've found something true. And that, in a world so full of masks, appearances, and conditional love is perhaps the closest thing to a miracle.